oh, this is going to be like this evil movie. I'm like, I'm going to hate it.
This is a movie that was released in late September, kind of intending to be out for Halloween. I think as like that kind of Halloween movie, it does work for that vibe, the kind of spooky, creepy.
And there's almost this little hint or twinkle in his eye that you get the sense that he's like, there is something supernatural out there that I'm not sure about.
Practically all of the paranormal or unexplainable phenomenon are explained by logical reasons.
By Poirot, because that's what he does best.
That's what he does best.
Do you think his atheism that he's so adamant about early in the film, do you think he kind of pushes pause on that at the end of the film?
Hello.
Hey, guys.
Welcome to another episode of the Pop Culture Contrarian podcast. Today, we acted like it was the 1990s. Not today, this week. We acted like it was the 1990s, and we went and saw a movie in theaters. I know, analog. But we went and saw A Haunting in Venice, which is the third adaptation of Agatha Christie's novels recently. I guess the first question, since it's an Agatha Christie murder mystery whodunit, is, Thomas, Andrew, did the mystery work?
Yeah, I think so. Going into it, I didn't know anything about the story.
Right, me neither.
And when I saw the trailer, in fact, the first thing that I thought was, oh, this is going to be a paranormal Halloween thing, because it is based on a Halloween type setting.
And the title,
and
makes you think
obviously. That. And they're attending a seance. And so I was like, oh, this is going to be like this evil movie. I'm like, I'm going to hate it.
Yeah.
And it wasn't that at all. And so, yeah, I think that it certainly, and this, of course, will be full of spoilers.
Yes, this is your spoiler warning. If you want to see A Haunting in Venice fresh, stop watching this podcast now. Come back after you've watched it.
Yeah.
Come back after you've watched it.
Yes, indeed. It was one of those things where you would never know exactly who it was at the end. It was just very delightful.
Yeah.
And we can get into the details, but I would say, yes, it worked, and it was delightful and really artistically beautiful and kind of fun in a lot of ways.
Okay. All right. That's an interesting take.
And the reason I say fun is just because of it being a classic genre.
Yeah, right. It's fun because we enjoy murder mysteries.
Correct, yeah.
Thomas?
Yeah, it was satisfying. It wasn't... I felt like I've seen this movie several times before.
Sure.
Because,
yeah.
It's kind of got that classic murder mystery in a haunted house kind of flavor. When it's Agatha Christie, it's the whodunit, right?
Yep.
So that was to be expected. This is the third Kenneth Branagh.
Branagh?
I think it's Branagh.
Branagh.
That's how I say it.
Branagh. Movie that he's acted, Hercule Poirot.
Yes.
And he directed it. So he's directed all three of them, actually. Mm-hmm. So the first one was Murder on the Orient Express. The second one was Murder on the Nile.
Death on the Nile.
Death on the Nile. And then this one, The Haunting in Venice. Of the three, I feel like they're all pretty well done movies.
But judging them as mysteries.
Judging them as mysteries, this one was fine. I don't think it wasn't as compelling, I would have to say, as the other two. The first two were. It did have some really great shots of Venice.
Yeah.
And the pacing was definitely slower than the first two movies.
Absolutely.
And the house is dark, which works. It's supposed to be, but it tends to feel almost like, I felt like half the time I felt like I was almost watching a black and white movie because it was so
I know what you're
dark.
I really liked that.
So I thought the mystery worked. I did like the kind of black and white aspect of it. I did kind of like the slower, almost somber tone of the movie because it does kind of start in a somber place and it stays pretty somber the whole time. This is a movie that was released in late September, kind of intending to be out for Halloween. I think as like that kind of Halloween movie, it does work for that vibe, the kind of spooky, creepy, but not terrifying. There's no jump scares, but it's just kind of a little bit unsettling. I liked that. As a mystery, I thought it worked maybe even better than the first two movies because in the very first movie, Spoilers for all 3 movies, but especially the first 2. In the first movie, of course, everyone did it.
Yeah. Well,
Which is that's kind of an anticlimax.
Everyone's a suspect.
Well, not just that, but they actually did all commit the crime.
They all had a part in it.
Well, they all stabbed the guy who died, whether or not he was already dead by the time they stabbed him.
Right.
They were all colluding together. So for me, that one felt a little bit like an anticlimax. It was still a good movie. I still enjoy it, but when I watch a whodunit, I'm expecting a killer or maybe 2.
A singular.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And in that one, it's kind of like the guy who died deserved it.
Right.
Then in the second one, it's got a little bit more of a traditional murder mystery feel to it, but the mystery aspect of it just didn't quite work as well for me because there's a lot of deaths in that movie and by different people. So it's just a little complicated.
More confusing.
Yeah, and that one was Death on the Nile? Or?
Yeah, Death on the Nile. And then this one, A Haunting in Venice, you have, it's pretty straightforward. You have the initial death, you have a few more deaths after that, but it's all essentially one killer.
And it's contained, and throughout you wonder, it could easily be this person because of these reasons, or it could be this person because of these reasons.
Yeah.
And then, it's not that person because of these reasons. And it's just the fun part of that genre.
Yeah,
yeah, it was. I felt like they didn't do as much investing in that, though, than as I think they have in the first 2. The first one especially, they were much more heavily invested in each person's backstory.
That's true.
This one, it's not that was absent, but it wasn't to the degree that I felt less like I was learning about the characters to figure out who was the perpetrator. It was more like I was just waiting for the reveal.
This one was a little bit more tightly focused for sure. In the first 2, you have these star-studded casts, so everyone has to have a good bit of screen time. And then in this one, you've really got Kenneth Branagh and you've got Tina Fey, and everyone else is fairly well known, but not super duper famous. They're not stars in the same way. And even Tina Fey is not like an A-list star.
That's true. I do think though that there just wasn't. It's not that it wasn't there, but it wasn't as heavy in the plot, I guess.
Yeah. Well, yeah, that's what I was saying. It's more tightly focused on Hercule himself.
Right.
And that is an aspect throughout the movie where he's having to second guess himself.
Well, it is a bit. He's going through, you could say, an existential crisis of his own existence. Why am I kind of even here?
Mm-hmm. And that's why he's in Italy to begin with. He's sort of just stolen away to his own private life and kind of sulking, really.
Yeah. So we'll get to that later because there's a lot to talk about there. But first, I think our listeners are going to want to know, this movie came out in 2023, so there's one really important question here. Was it woke? So, Thomas, I'll give you first shot. Was it woke?
No, I would say it wasn't. I say it felt very much like you're watching an Agatha Christie story there wasn't some kind of underlying agenda that I could see that would have deviated significantly from one of her novels.
Mm-hmm. Andrew?
Definitely not woke. I don't think I picked up a single instance that even made me question.
Yeah, I'm right there with both of you. I don't think this was woke at all. This movie, except for the quality of the filming, could have been made in 1970 or 1920. It was timeless in a good way.
Yeah, that's
except
why.
for one factor, but we'll get to that.
Okay, all right.
Okay, well, I'll be interested to hear that. That's another reason why I say fun.
Mm-hmm.
Just because it's like maybe a better word than fun. It was just refreshing.
Yeah, it's kind of relaxing. You can let your guard down while watching this movie, and it's not going to punch you when you're least expecting it, like a lot of movies do today.
Except for a jump scare here and there.
There's one or two, but really it's not like Paranormal Activity or something where you're supposed to be jumping in your seat.
No.
All right, so no, it's not woke. That's our verdict here. It's unanimous.
It's not overly gory. There's no sexual scenes.
Nope. And that is something in Death on the Nile that bothered me because I was like, oh, it's an Agatha Christie mystery. I can invite my parents to go watch a movie.
Oh, right.
And in the first scene in Death on the Nile is the most sexual dance you've ever seen. And it's You know,
That's a bit
I don't know
awkward
how
for
you
you.
experience that when you're watching it with your loved one or you're by yourself or whatever, but when you're watching it with your parents, it's mortifying.
Yeah, no kidding. Jeez.
So
Yeah.
there is, like, if you're the kind of person who this bothers, there is some kind of supernatural elements with like seances where, you know, maybe that's something you're sensitive to, but it's not presented as true.
The death, the first murder was a little bit gruesome.
It's a bit gruesome.
The details are kind of gruesome, but it's not really gruesome on screen. So
No, not so much. Yeah, I would say it's artistically done. It's not really terrifying. So it was rated PG-13, I think reasonably so.
Yeah. I think, honestly, it wouldn't take much editing to make this a PG movie.
Yeah.
Well, maybe. I guess they do. There's a lot of talk about suicide and whether it was or was not a suicide. So maybe that's why it's got to be PG-13.
Yeah, that's a good point. But really, even the scary parts of it were not extremely terrifying or anything. I mean, It was spooky, but it wasn't like scary in my opinion.
Right. I think spooky or creepy is much better terms for this than scary or frightening.
Yeah. And also because in the end, practically with a few exceptions, practically all of the paranormal or unexplainable phenomenon are explained by logical reasons.
By Poirot, because that's what he does best.
That's what he does best.
All right, so it's not woke. We've talked about that. What themes did we notice in the movie? I was struck by there's this one little kid in the movie, and he's got this dad who's got really bad PTSD. They call it battle fatigue in the movie, but it's PTSD, shell shock. It's all, I think, the same thing. I'm not a doctor. Don't quote me on that. And so this 10-year-old, 12-year-old has to take care of his dad, and the son's always very put together, and the dad's always kind of just on the edge of losing it. So there's the theme that this kid's having to grow up too fast, and it ends up taking a toll on him.
Right, and the father's in that state because of the death of his wife, correct?
Well,
his wife died, but it was also the battle.
Yeah, he was a medic or an army doctor, and he was liberating camps in Germany.
Yeah, he says Bergen-Belsen specifically.
Yeah,
and he talks about he talks about how, you know, they were killing people the first day, these starving people, by giving them milk, and
by accident,
and that's a very real trauma for a lot of the people who liberated
trauma
Germany.
of the doctor ending up unintentionally killing the patient.
Yeah,
he noted bringing skeletons back to life. Nursing skeletons back to life.
He's calling the concentration camp survivors skeletons because, And my grandfather, you know, talked to me about concentration camps because he helped liberate some or got there right after they'd been liberated. And so he met these people too. And that's how my grandfather spoke about it. It was very, very similar to the way it's spoken about in the movie.
Mm-hmm. And it shows that when kids are forced to grow up too fast, they're still kids.
Yeah.
And this young man's a very smart young man, but it's later revealed that he made some rather bad decisions in order to preserve himself and his father that have led to
bad consequences.
Lots of really bad consequences.
But at the same time, he still does that with the childlike innocence.
Mm-hmm.
And there's also just the fact that he's had to grow up so fast. The first time you see him in the movie, he's reading an Edgar Allan Poe novel while all the other kids are celebrating at this Halloween party they're having.
What was the novel?
It wasn't a specific novel. I think it was Tales of the Strange and something like that.
So several of his short stories.
Yeah. You know, when the kid has to grow up too fast, then he's kind of separated from his peers and can't really engage in the childlike stuff his friends do. Or his peers do, I guess, because they're not his friends.
There's the theme of the jealous mother.
Oh, yeah, the overbearing mother.
As Jordan Peterson might call it, the devouring mother.
That's exactly how he would call it. Yes, that is a theme that's there, and it's interesting because that's maybe not the most kosher theme for a movie in 2023, but they didn't shy away from it, which is good because it's a real phenomenon.
Mm-hmm.
So you shouldn't ignore a real phenomenon.
Yeah.
Thomas, anything else? All right. Well, there's one we've kind of been slipping around here. So, Andrew, I think
Andrew was going to introduce this theme, I thought.
Yeah, I think this really predicates the whole personality of Poirot, and that is his atheism, or generally just saying, I don't think God exists.
Yeah.
And that all of the paranormal things are mediums, and these kinds of people are explained by tricks.
Yeah.
And that there can't be a God, or any of this can't be real because people are evil and there's terrible things in the world.
Well, I think it's a little bit inverted on that because he has this tirade at the beginning of the movie where, and to me, it felt very clear that this is a man who's just recently lost his faith. And so it's painful. And so it's not so much that he's an atheist. It's not how I saw it, just that he's the wounded animal lashing out. But he has this whole tirade at the beginning where he's like, there can be no ghosts because if there's ghosts, there's souls. And if there's souls, there's a God. And there's no God because there's too much pain in the world.
Right. That's exactly right.
That is a theme throughout the whole movie. Yeah.
And while it is an old idea and an old movie, that's also a theme that we see constantly in modern society.
Oh, yeah.
Always the argument of if there was a God, bad things wouldn't happen.
Right. It's C.S. Lewis calls it the problem of pain. Yeah. It's tough to understand how, an omnibenevolent, all-powerful God can also allow pain in the world. And, that's one of those things that Christians have a tough time articulating the answer to.
Yeah.
Well, I don't think I would push back. I don't think it's a tough thing to articulate the answer to. I think the answer is difficult for people to accept. That's the way I would put it.
Okay. Yeah.
I think that it's, let's just be pretty upfront. It's judgment, right?
It's the curse from the fall.
It's the curse from the fall. It's an aspect of judgment. When you choose the wrong, there are consequences.
Yeah.
Well, and furthermore, it is, in my view of the subject, human free will.
Yeah.
To act outside of God and things of God. When you're acting outside of the things of God, bad things happen.
Right. And I think there's it's nice because this movie, one, it does stand by itself. You can watch this movie and the mystery will make perfect sense without having watched any of the others or read any of the novels. But it builds on the character from the previous movies, which is nice when movies actually do that, because all too often you'll have a movie where it's allegedly the same character from movie to movie, but there's no growth across the different movies. So it's nice that there's a clear line, I think, here. So at the end of Death of the Nile, Poirot goes to take a break, right? Because his friend Bouc, who was killed in Death of the Nile, before he was killed, tells Poirot, you need to take a break. And then the whole ordeal with the Death of the Nile it's pretty grisly and just terrible, more terrible than some of the other cases, like Murder on the Orient Express.
Yeah.
So
he's been through unspeakable traumas.
Right.
And really he is being such a rational man, he is having a very emotional response to reality.
Yeah.
Right. And so this is in this movie. Now, the character that Agatha Christie developed, Poirot, there is no indication that he was an atheist. He was maybe a nominal Catholic.
Born a Catholic is
born
the
a
word
Catholic,
she used,
as they say, and he goes, and there's references of him going to church on Sundays and stuff like this.
Yeah.
So there's a little bit, and we kind of talked about this, I think, or we will, but of the three movies, this one is the one that probably deviates most from the story material in which it comes from, which it was based on a Hallowe'en Party. And there's definitely
the book by Agatha Christie,
right? Yeah. And so it differs.
Well, like the whole central story, the whole mystery is different.
The whole, yeah. So I think the hardest thing for me with these latest, with the Kenneth Branagh versions, is Kenneth Branagh as Poirot. He's just not David Suchet, and I think that.
So David Suchet played Poirot for a long time?
Yeah, from 1989 through the last one, I think, was 2013.
Oh, wow. That's a long time.
So in your mind, that is the face of the character.
It's kind of like he so embodied Poirot that when anyone else, now he's by far not the only actor who's ever acted Poirot. but
Yeah.
it's like he so owned it that it's hard to see another actor come in and try to be
Kind of like Harrison Ford as Indiana Jones.
Exactly.
Yeah.
If somebody else tried to play it, wouldn't work.
Well, and Harrison Ford would probably, if he was not still alive, rise from his grave to stop that from happening.
And so part of watching these three films that Kenneth Branagh has done as Poirot is interesting to see his rendition of it, but in my mind, it's difficult to see him as the character.
You just can't get Suchet out of your head.
Yeah, and maybe that's the best way. I mean, I think...
well, he is quite different. Suchet has black hair and a black mustache, and Branagh has blonde hair with a big blonde mustache that's much bigger than Suchet's.
Well, and I think even Suchet kind of was a little more like rotund or portly, and I think that actually fits the actual character of Poirot a little bit better. I think his accent, maybe not believable, but it just seems like he embodies that whole. He owns it. That's the way to put it.
Yeah. Okay.
Inspector.
Yes, Inspector. So, have you seen any of the films with him as?
I have not seen any of them.
Okay.
No.
I mean, have you?
Not all the way through. I think I've seen him on TV.
Okay.
Well, you also say Poirot much better than Andrew and I do. Andrew and I are much more Americanized.
Well, yes.
Well, I don't know if I'm saying it very well.
Perot.
Well,
Ross.
Poirot.
Poirot. Different person. Oh, okay.
So this is just kind of some flavor. But a couple years back, my cousin threw this big murder mystery Halloween party.
Oh, yeah. Those are fun.
Sounds awesome.
It was great.
Yeah.
It was one of those, you buy the kit and it gives you a script. And so all the characters had funny names. I was Earl Harbor, which I didn't even get at first because when I got mine, it was just that. I didn't know everyone's name was a pun. So there was also like Spit, Fire, or something like that. And anyhow, my cousin, a different cousin, was I think it was Hermes Poirot, something like that. So he was Poirot's less successful brother. It was a lot of fun. So he was dressed up. He had drawn on in mascara, a little mustache. It was so much fun.
I love it.
We all had a great time.
That's cool.
And the murderer ended up being Alana Turing. Yeah. So yeah, that's one of my main associations with Poirot is that murder mystery party.
Yeah.
All right. So Poirot does have this whole struggle with atheism in the movie, and it's kind of materialism. There's nothing beyond what I can see and feel.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
And he proves it again and again in the movie. They have this big seance, and this medium is doing her big show, and she's going like, "Go," and pressing a typewriter that's feet below her hands. And it's like, "Ooh, how's she doing that?" And Poirot's like, "There's a guy in the chimney. He's pushing a button."
Yeah. And he pulls him out of the chimney.
Yeah.
Time and time again, there's always a material explanation for what would otherwise seem to be paranormal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
I was thinking the whole movie because of that. This medium in the movie, who I think was just completely a fraud, although she has a couple of things she does in the movie that's like not quite explained. I think, what was the one you mentioned, Andrew?
Yeah, I felt like when she channeled the child's voice, that was not really explained. I think really though, when she gets almost possessed, that could have been an act, but it seemed probably outside of what she normally would do.
Yeah, maybe. Yeah.
Except,
well, because that happened right after Poirot exposed part of it. So
Yeah.
I think to me, it felt like she was like, "Oh, I got to step up in my game."
yeah, I was reading more of that into it
That could
because
be.
that character didn't make any sense once the mystery's figured out. Then you're like, well, how did that connect?
Yeah. But she does do the cunning thing that a lot of these mediums and psychics do, which is they look at you, they kind of evaluate your emotional state, they get a little bit of detail on you, and then they make cunning guesses that they state as things they just know. And then you confirm it, and then you've bought in, and you're much more likely to believe everything they say from then on.
You've been to a lot of seances.
Well, okay, you're right. I'm completely basing this on all the murder mysteries and things like that I've watched, where all the mediums are always fake. So maybe there's a real medium out there somewhere who I'm doing injustice to.
Straight, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. Real mediums, aka people channeling demons.
Or unclean spirits, at the very least.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not something I'd really want to get tangled up in.
Yeah. No thanks.
No. Closest I've come was earlier this summer. My cousin and I were walking through St. Augustine, and she wanted to go into this shop selling crystals because of jewelry. But they had all these crystals, and crystal people believe all sorts of things about what crystal can do.
New Age stuff.
So I asked the lady behind the desk, so I see you got these big crystals here. If I throw some bad vibes at them, is it going to like ruin them? Are they going to be unsellable? And she's like, no, it'll just bounce it right back at you. And I was like, oh, better not then.
Yeah.
I don't actually believe in it, but, also I'm not going to take stupid chances.
Right.
Don't tempt fate. So yeah, this movie was much different, especially in the way where Poirot has kind of lost his faith than the novel.
Do you think, Andrew, because I think Sterling and I were discussing this earlier, do you think his atheism that he's so adamant about early in the film, do you think he kind of pushes pause on that at the end of the film or begins to start questioning it?
I think that he acknowledges a sense of purpose that he had otherwise lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, we see that.
And that probably opens the door to him being like, I can reevaluate this maybe. Because I think it softens him.
Yeah, I think there was some statement at the end, and I'm not sure, I can't remember exactly what it was, but it happened right after, the death of the killer.
Yes.
And he seems to indicate, because of the way in which it happens, that you get this kind of sense from him that he's like, yeah, everything, he says, I don't know if he starts by saying everything and then qualifies it and says, most things can be explained.
It is something like that. It's pretty close.
Right,
to what you
and
just
there's
said.
almost this little hint or twinkle in his eye that you get the sense that he's like, there is something supernatural out there that I'm not sure about.
Well, there were at least a couple of instances that were not fully explained.
The voice, as we've said, and then...
Yeah, the voice was never explained, and also the taps. There were instances where he was turning on taps. Faucets, water.
Yeah.
And they just didn't work, and then they suddenly worked, and that happened not just to him.
Right.
Oh, that's right.
So one thing, this is a spoiler, but one thing that just kind of explains maybe why we're questioning some of this stuff is because he gets poisoned partway through the movie with a hallucinogen. So he's constantly seeing things like a little girl that's just not there, hearing sing-song voices that aren't there. I will say I was proud of myself. I picked up on that right as it happened.
Oh, yeah. Nice.
So, and this is another aspect of the movie we should talk about, his friend and that whole ordeal there. But his friend brings him a cup of tea, and the host of the party says, I thought my cupboards were bare. And the friend says, oh yeah, I got the honey from the pantry. And immediately I was like, I was already kind of on the lookout for this because I kind of expected it. I don't know why. Just something about the way the movie was framed that he would start seeing things that weren't real. So I was like, that's definitely it.
Mm-hmm.
He's getting a drug now.
Oh. No, I didn't catch that as quickly as you did.
Well, like I said, I was on the lookout for it because I was guessing that was going to happen.
Well, what I did find interesting early on is how fast they were willing to reveal that, especially during the seance, all the gadgetry that was being used to make it seem like there was something that it wasn't.
Right.
It happened almost, I don't know if it happened too quickly, but it was interesting how that was one of the things that they didn't slow walk. I thought they might slow walk the whole thing, but I guess they couldn't have done it too much longer because of when the murder happens. But yeah, I think that the eeriness of it was after stuff like that started getting exposed like right away. Then there was no like, well, of course there's going to be an explanation for every weird thing that we're seeing. So
yeah, and
it'll be explained. And in some senses, that was very satisfying that most of the things were explained.
Mm-hmm. It does leave you with that lingering question of that last scene.
That last scene was just the one you're just not quite sure.
You remember, because the ghost at the very end.
Yes.
Yeah. So there's one final scene with the ghost at the end where it's like, was that real?
Yeah.
I don't know. So the one other aspect of this movie that we haven't talked about that's kind of a pretty prominent point is the whole movie set in motion by his friend, this novelist showing up, who the novelist is clearly a stand-in for Agatha Christie herself, because she writes novels essentially about Poirot, but in Poirot's world. She shows up and invites him to this whole thing. And then you find out, major spoiler here, she was setting him up the whole time.
Just so she could write a new, better story.
Right.
What, was she suffering from writer's block or something?
Her last 3 novels had not been bestsellers, I think.
Yeah.
That was just kind of slimy. I mean, it helps the mystery because it introduces more unsurety, like what's happening, because she was also conspiring to make things seem more mysterious.
Yeah, I've kind of had her pegged as the murderer for a while.
I definitely didn't trust her. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And it's also a bit sad because at the beginning of the film, Poirot's butler comes and says, there's a friend. It's like, I don't have any friends. Yeah. And then later on, she reminds him that he doesn't have any friends. Right. And she's not his friend.
Right.
Just admire
his friend
right.
in this trilogy of movies was Book, and Book is dead.
Yeah, and that might be another theme that I just think of it now, is that the issue of friendship. Because I think that kind of is woven through elements of it. Poirot's claiming he has no friends, and he's in a state of depression, I guess you could say.
I think that's pretty clear at the beginning.
Yeah.
But then you have elements of true friendship being expressed as the movie goes forward, and then a lot of things are expressed at the very end. Like the one, I can't remember what her role was. She's
a nun or something.
Nun or nursemaid or
she's not a nurse because that's actually relevant to the story.
Right, but she was a caretaker.
Yeah,
I guess.
She was looking after the orphans.
Yes.
Well, also she was looking after the opera singer's daughter.
Oh, yes.
And she was there. In fact, well, major spoiler right here. She was responsible for killing her by accident.
Right. She was the person guilty of manslaughter. She was not the person guilty of premeditated.
It was not intentional, but it was by way of the poison honey.
Right.
That was supposed to just keep the daughter in a stupor, but then she didn't know that it was a problematic hallucinogenic poison type substance. And
since we've gotten that far, I'll just go ahead and outline kind of the whole mystery.
Okay.
I feel like we've said enough.
Sure.
Don't you think, Thomas?
I mean, you can.
Just context on that last thing. So the opera singer's daughter dies at the beginning or before the movie starts, and that's kind of the thing that sets the seance in motion because they're trying to reach her. And then you find out that the daughter was being kept sick, just sick enough that she didn't know what was real, and then she could be manipulated and controlled by the killer, and then this nun or whatever her role is,
caretaker,
is taking care of the girl one night and makes her tea with honey, but puts too much in because the honey was the poison, and it ends up killing her.
Mm-hmm.
So that didn't actually spoil who the killer is. So there you go. But it provided context to what Andrew was saying.
Yeah.
So yeah, the aspect of the novelist friend betraying Poirot it's just kind of sad.
Mm-hmm.
The movie doesn't end on an especially sad note. It ends hopefully, because at the beginning of the movie, Poirot has all these people come in like, help, my family's dropping like flies, help me not die. And he's just completely ignoring them, does not care. Then at the end of the movie, the same guy shows up and he's like, help, my family's dropping like flies. And Poirot's like, yeah, it's the doctor, dude. Don't trust your doctor. And he's just like, I'll help you. So it does end in, I think that's kind of the big thing in the movie. Poirot gets some hope back. Maybe he doesn't believe in God, but he has some hope again.
He kind of rediscovers his purpose, you could say, maybe. Now I do think, and I'm not sure if this is entirely true, but I've heard that this is his Branagh's last film doing Poirot.
I think it's rumored. I don't know that it's confirmed, but it is rumored this is his last one.
Now, they don't leave it like that, though. They leave it pretty open-ended.
Right. There's definitely room for another, but there's no, hanging plot threads. It's just Poirot is still out there solving mysteries.
Right.
But that's also a good place to end with the character. You don't really... Not every series should end like No Time to Die does with James Bond. Sometimes you want the character to just still be out there doing something somewhere.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's for sure.
Yeah. All right. So, y'all have anything else to add, or should we summarize?
I think we should summarize.
Yeah.
All right. So, we talked about, did the mystery work?
Yeah.
And yes, we all thought so, I think. Well, Thomas, not quite as much.
It was enjoyable, but it was also felt like a story I've seen a lot of times.
Mm-hmm. Well, maybe he's just seen too many murder mysteries.
Probably have. Honestly, I probably have. I'm jaded.
There you go. Jaded old man. All right. Was it woke?
No.
Resoundingly no.
Refreshingly so.
Yeah. Mm-hmm. But there were some, I think, good themes that we talked about that it included war trauma and growing up too fast and betrayal by friends. And these are real things humans experience, and it can be helpful to see it on screen. I don't know that it's necessarily, I'm not saying this movie's going to fix you or anything, but it's nice sometimes to see those things treated in a somber but not despairing light.
Yeah.
We talked about his loss of faith is how I would say it, or his atheism. The fact that this movie especially differs from the book significantly compared to the first two movies. And then, talked a little bit about psychics and mediums and stuff. And now we're summarizing it.
There it is. You got the whole bit. You don't even have to go see it now.
There you go. All right. This has been the Pop Culture Contrarian episode on A Haunting in Venice. Oh, it's a review. So how many stars? Andrew, how many stars out of 5?
Give it a 4.
A 4 out of 5. Thomas?
And mainly just because it's a classic and it's beautifully shot and it's got really great cinematography.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, all 3 of the movies do. Yeah.
I would give it 3.5 stars.
Okay.
The Contrarian.
Yeah, it's decent.
So the first part of the movie, I was a little bit bored because it's a little bit slow, it's somber. But by the end, I was like, that was an enjoyable experience. So 3.5, 4 stars in general, I think is fair. I'll say 3.5. But then if you're wanting a movie to watch that kind of puts you in a Halloween mood, I think it's quite good. So maybe 4.5 for that purpose.
Mm-hmm.
Depends on how much you like Halloween, I guess.
Yes.
Along the Halloween theme, and I know this is deviating a little. I don't usually think of Venice as Halloweenish.
No, certainly not.
But what was Halloweenish is they do have the scene where they're in the gondola boats, and there's 3 of them, and for whatever reason, they're each in their own separate gondola boat going to this seance event.
Oh, right. And they're all riding, and it's just kind of creepy.
All riding and creepy, and it's kind of dusk.
Because they're wearing black robes, or some of them at least are wearing black robes with white masks.
the gondola drivers, I don't know what they're called.
There's
gondoliers.
Gondoliers. They're the ones wearing these dark robes with the white masks that are kind of like, that was pretty eerie, and kind of the creep factor was pretty high there.
On that, the medium also appears wearing one of those at the beginning.
That's true.
And then right before she makes her exit of the stage, she puts the mask and the cloak on Poirot. And I don't know if there's meaning or symbolism there. I'm sure there is, but it was just something about that felt very uncomfortable. Him having the mask and the cloak on. I was like, take that off, dude.
It didn't make sense to me that he would have been fine with her doing that. I'm not sure that was just weird. But the most Halloween thing in the film was the bobbing for apples. Yeah. That was just kind of like there. And I'm like, you're going to a seance. Why is this here?
Well, because it was a Halloween party.
Because it was a Halloween party with all the little kids. Yeah. But it was just kind of funny.
The bobbing for apples is actually a part of the original novel.
Yeah,
that's how the girl dies.
Right.
She's drowned while trying to bob for apples.
Not in this film, no.
Not in this film, no. That's not a spoiler. It's a spoiler for a book from 100 years ago. So, get mad at me if you want. All right. I'm not going to summarize that because we've already done our summary.
Yes, we've done it.
You've just heard what we said. This has been the Pop Culture Contrarian. This podcast is brought to you by the Patriot Post. The Patriot Post is the oldest news, policy, and opinion digest on the web. It's right. It's free. Be sure to like and subscribe. Bye.
Bye.
See you guys.